of Israel, pure olive oil to feed the everlasting flame of the menorah, which Aaron is to kindle each day from evening till morning. The priestly garments to be worn by the Kohanim, the priests, while serving in the sanctuary, are described. All Kohanim wore the ketonet, a full-length linen tunic, 2, michnasayim, linen breeches, 3, mitznefet or migbat, a linen turban, 4, avnet, a long sash wound above the waist.
Oh, sorry. Next page. Yeah. Come on. Part 2. Yeah.
In addition, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wore 5, the ephod, an apron-like garment made of blue, purple, and red-dyed wool, linen, and gold thread. 6, the hoshen, a breastplate containing 12 precious stones inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. 7, the me'il, a cloak of blue wool with gold bells and decorative pomegranates on its hem. 8, the sitz, a golden plate worn on the forehead bearing the inscription Holy to God. Tetzaveh also includes God's detailed instructions for the 7-day initiation of Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, into the priesthood, and for the making of the golden altar on which the ketoret, the incense, was burned. This number 8, the sitz, the golden plate worn on the forehead, is that the origin of the word tzitzis, or is it connected to the word tzitzis?
No, it's a good question. I don't think it is connected, but it may be because a tzitz may mean also a chain or a thread, because it was on a chain. So it may refer to that, but I'm not.
Oh, right.
Sure.
Thank you.
Not certain on that. Don't quote me on that.
No.
Okay, so what were the
I have actually a funny story about this, Rabbi. When I was teaching, one year we did a topic about fabrics, and every once in a while each class did a special assembly for the whole school about something they were studying, and we did an assembly about the fabric topic we'd been doing, and I had one of my boys stand up and be dressed. We didn't use linen itself because it was too expensive, but we used white cotton. But
right.
It's like, and I read out this instruction about the clothing of the priests, and
right.
when I got him all dressed up, all the little Muslim children, they were all thrilled, because they said that's how their imam looked when they went to the mosque. Their imam wore just those clothes, or their grandfather wore those clothes, their father wore those clothes, and they were all thrilled that their clothing was on our assembly.
Yeah. Not quite the same, but yes, I mean, the Sephardi chief rabbis also wear that kind of thing, right? The Sephardi rabbis, the turbans and the tunics and things. It's very interesting. Here's a picture of the Kohen Gadol, looking quite grand. Mm-hmm. Definitely looking not very Ashkenazi. So,
nice white beard.
If someone would ask you generally, are we concerned with external appearances in Judaism, and like beauty and splendor? Like, as without talking about this week's Sedra for a minute, if somebody would say, is Judaism about appearances? What would you say?
Not really.
No, you'd say it's about serving God and inner feelings and humility and all these qualities we speak about. Actually,
don't judge a person about a book by its cover.
Right. Don't look at the vessel, but what's inside it, says in Pirkei Avos. Humility, dressing. The reason a lot of communities have the dress codes they have is either because of actual laws of tzniut, particularly ladies, but also, why do religious Jews often wear dark clothing? No, because it's more modest, it's more conservative. It's, you don't want to be all flashy and stand out, and show off. I think there was often a feeling also that if you did have particularly wealth, or, and you flaunted it, then you were tempting eye and horror. Other people would be jealous. So that was never a value sort of thing. And yet here we are, we have pages and pages of these garments that the high priest wore, described in great detail, which is quite unusual, really. I mean, should you dress nicely Shabbos and Yom Tov? Yes. Or a bar mitzvah? Yes. There's nice and there's nicer. We have great detail about the exact, physical appearance of the clothes, the shape and the size and the color and the materials, and it all seems a bit over the top. Let's see. Right, who'd like to read number 2?
I'll read it.
Go on.
You shall make holy garments for your brother Aaron, for holy and glory, for honor and glory.
Right, so this seems quite clear, right? I'm sure I've told the story before, by the way. Rabbi Shmuley Bateach, if anyone remembers him. Remember, he told the story many years ago. He was talking about the importance of wearing Shabbos clothes. I remember as a child, I got a bar mitzvah suit, and I started wearing it to shul, probably from my bar mitzvah. And I would get home, my dad would say, you should take your suit off, it's going to get dirty. And I actually remember saying, but it's still Shabbos, just because you come home from shul, you don't have to, change into your shorts and t-shirts. And conversely, I told the story that Rabbi Shochet from Mill Hill told of his grandparents that were in hiding in Amsterdam during the war. And his grandmother made it basically every Friday would say to his grandpa, you must put a tie on for Shabbos, even though they were in hiding, they didn't go out anywhere. And I mentioned this during COVID when we were in lockdown. So clothes are important. A person feels more menschlich in their clothes. I went to a wedding yesterday morning. I've never been to such an early wedding. I was just helping someone else out. I didn't know the couple. 10 o'clock in central London. Anyway, so I was wearing a tie and a suit. Don't usually wear a suit and tie on a Sunday morning, I suppose. I usually often don't wear a tie, or maybe I wear a jacket. It doesn't necessarily match. And somebody said, oh, well, you look all smart. And I thought, this is nice. And I also thought, do I really not look smart the rest of the time? So anyway, Rabbi Bateach told this story that when he was in Australia, Shabbos afternoon, he's walking home from shul, or like the end, lunchtime, maybe it was the afternoon, and he sees the local Reform rabbi in his shorts and t-shirt washing his car Shabbos afternoon. So he says to him, Shabbat Shalom, whatever, and he says, can I ask you a funny question? He says, did you wear your shorts and t-shirt to shul this morning? And the guy says, no, obviously not. I wore a suit and tie. He says, okay, can I ask you another question? If you were still wearing your suit and tie, would you be washing your car? He says, no, of course I wouldn't. So he said from this, the importance of clothing, it does define how we act depending on our clothing. If you're dressed up smartly, you feel like you have to behave in a certain way, right? It feels Shabbostic or whatever. You feel
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
You feel $1 million. So clothing, and also maybe it's just worth mentioning, this comes up often in relation to women and discussions about sneers. It doesn't say anywhere that you should look like a schmutter that the cat just dragged in. Person is supposed to dress modestly, both men and women. That means not uncovering lots of flesh. It means not wearing bright
You've been
clothes,
placed on hold. Please wait.
It doesn't mean that you have to look like basically a tramp that just, the cat dragged in. You can look nice and presentable and smart and elegant without going overboard. And there's value in that, right? People should look at a person, particularly a religious person, and see somebody who, cares.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Looks after themselves. We're getting a hold message from someone.
Yes, I think it's from Beryl. She must be dialing up, and it's.
Oh, that's a shame. So there is a concept of dressing in a certain way, right? A bride is dressed up, right? In the Talmud talks about the brides wearing dresses. No one's saying
you've been placed on hold. Please wait.
I'm just Beryl, I'm gonna mute you. I hope you don't mind because it's just repeating. So but still, it seems a bit over the top. And we're told that this clothing was for glory and splendor. Can we really not appreciate the glory of the Aaron and these special people that were righteous leaders that loved the people that did such amazing things without the clothing? And yet that's exactly what it was, right? It was for glory and splendor. Question: what is the most important line that we all know. I was going to say prayer, but it's more a statement of faith. Anyone?
Shema Yisrael?
Shema, thank you. What does Shema mean?
What? What was
Shema.
it?
Here.
Oh, sorry.
Here. Do you know how many times the word Shema appears in the book of Devarim?
No.
When Moshe is repeating basically the whole, restating the whole Torah. Do you know how many times the word Shema appears? 92 times apparently. I haven't counted, but I'm told it's 92. The word Ra'eh for seeing appears a few times. In Judaism, we very much talk a lot about hearing, listening. We cover our eyes even when we say Shema. We don't look, right? It's a world of sound. Interesting. So there could be various reasons for this. One suggestion is that a lot of cultures, and a lot of particularly the cultures that we were told not to emulate, often did have great visual things, right? They worshiped the sun or the stars or the river or the animals or the earth, or they built huge representations of those things. So we don't do visual cues. We don't do that at all. God is beyond nature. Let's look at what King David says in Psalms. Who'd like to read number 3?
I'll read that.
Go on.
I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is man, that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man, that you care for him?
Right, that's a quote we use at the beginning of Yizkor. So the heavens, the moon and the stars are just God's handiwork. It's not God himself, it's his handiwork, right? You can't see God, right? When you look at the heavens, you look at the vastness of space, or you look at, natural wonders, the Grand Canyon, you say, wow, this is amazing. It's not God, it's a manifestation of his hard work. So he doesn't reveal himself to us visually, very rarely. He reveals himself in words, right? How does God speak to us at Sinai? It says he spoke to you out of fire. You heard the words, but you saw no form, only a voice. Okay, there's this wonderful, oh, here it is. Sorry, who'd like to read that properly inside? Go on.
I'll read it.
Please.
The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice.
Right. So without the Mishkan and without the temple, without knowing all this, if you would be referring generally to Judaism, you'd say it's not about visual stimuli often. It's about hearing. It's about God talking rather than seeing some visual thing, right? One of the most famous examples of this, wonderful, we've seen this before. We often don't see the full quote. We know one line, which I've highlighted large there, the Kol Demama Daka, right, which we talk about Unasana Sokov. Uva shofar gadol yitaka, he will sound the great shofar, the Kol Demama Daka Yishaman. You'll hear a small, still voice. This is the story of Elijah, who goes out to behold the Lord. And let's see what happens. Who wants to read number 5? Who hasn't read yet? Are we back to you, Iris? I think we
Okay.
are. Yeah.
And he said, go out and stand in the mountain before the Lord. Behold, the Lord passes, and a great and strong wind splitting mountains and shattering boulders before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. Not in the earthquake was the Lord. After the earthquake, fire. Not in the fire was the Lord. And after the fire, a still small sound. And as Elijah heard, he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah?
Right. So again, it's the voice, it's the hearing. So this week's Sedra, or generally the Sedras at the moment, seem to be very much an exception. We have a lot of visual stuff. The Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the Kohanim. We're going to look in a bit more detail about that in a moment. Question. Anyone know the Hebrew word for a garment, item clothing? Anyone?
No.
Is it beged?
It's a beged, correct. Have you ever noticed? I haven't. I only just noticed this just now. 1 second, I'm just looking this up. Where else we find the phrase beged or bogad? Anyone?
Was it in the story of Adam and Eve?
Yes. Hold that thought. Okay. Because you're going to come back to that, you're on the right track. In the vidui, the confession, we say, Shamnu, Bogadnu.
Oh, yes.
Bogadnu, I'm just looking up his translators. We've betrayed or been disloyal. Seems like we've put on a veneer. We've been fake. So, beged, clothing, is often actually associated with deception or betrayal. Let's give some examples, right? Well, it's not betrayal, but Adam and Eve, as Iris just alluded to, the fig leaves after eating the forbidden fruit, right? Jacob wears Esau's clothes to deceive his father. Tamar dresses up in the clothes of a harlot to deceive her father-in-law. Joseph's brothers get blood on his cloak to deceive their father. What does Potiphar's wife do to frame Joseph? She takes his cloak, yeah? Joseph himself, one of the ways he's able to fool his brothers is he's dressed up as the viceroy of Egypt.
And Tamar, she dressed up
Tamar,
as
that's what I said, yeah, Tamar dressing up as a harlot. So we've got quite a lot of examples where clothes actually are used in quite literally as a disguise, right? It's in a negative. And now, interestingly, this week we have a positive emphasis on clothing. Clothes are basically surface. They are skin deep, right? They're not something that's profound and deep. So, it gets even worse. Let's see what it says in the book of Samuel. I'll read this. The Lord said to Samuel, pay no attention to his appearance or his stature, for I have rejected him. I'm not sure what this was talking about. Maybe King Saul after he fell out of favor. For not as man sees does the Lord see. Man sees what is visible on the surface, but the Lord sees into the heart. Right? So in Judaism, it's about what's inside, not what's on the outside. And also, it's a uniform for the Kohen or Kohen Gadol. Right? What about the person? So if I put on a uniform, does that make me, fitting? There's a famous story about a certain shul where they used to say, you can only get called up if you wear a hat. Right? And this guy would come for years and years and years. And finally, one day he turns up in a hat and they called him up. So he goes up to the bimmer, puts the hat on the bimmer and says, here, you have the aliyah. You're the one that got me it. Right? So, right? It's just externalities. Right? Unfortunately, anyone can put on a uniform. Now, if you put on a uniform and you also, wear that uniform with pride, whether you're a police officer or in the military or a nurse or whatever it is, that's something else. But unfortunately, anyone can put on the veneer of, right? We've seen recently, unfortunately, we've seen with real police officers, but also, right, many years ago, Ellie's bike got stolen when we were first here. And I look at the CCTV, two guys in high-vis jackets jumped over the fence and took it. And I said to the police afterwards, what's going on? They said, that's what they do. They dress up in the uniform that nobody would, if you're walking around high visibility, no one in their right mind would think you're a thief, because why would you do that, right? And yet we're told that they wore these clothes for glory and for splendor. By the way, who is glory usually reserved for? The answer is God. So it's very unusual, this aesthetic kind of beauty, right? The matriarchs are described as being beautiful, but often it's an inner beauty as well. We see their morality, Rivka's kindness, right? Eliezer is told to find someone who will feed the animals first, right? Here we have something which is basically pure materialism.
What do the priests and the high priests wear their priestly garments all the time, or only?
No, only
when
during
they
the
were on
service in the
duty?
temple. And the Kohen Gadol had more than everyone else. He had 8. I think everyone else had, was it 5? Don't remember. And it was very elaborate. Now, I did ask a question before about hearing and seeing. There is a place in the Torah where we're told very explicitly about seeing. Does anyone know where it is? It's also in Devarim, actually.
It's the hearing and seeing. So,
There's a mitzvah involved. It talks about being seen. Being seen. What you're supposed to do on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot?
go up to the temple.
Right. So the Torah says you should be seen in my temple. You should be seen. You should appear, basically. So on the few times we find seeing as opposed to hearing. There's another time also at the end of the story of the Akedah, Aaron names the place Hashem Yireh, the mountain where Hashem is seen, where there's vision. So that, of course, you might recall, the mountain, Mount Moriah, where the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, took place, we're told is the future site of the temple. So there is this, when it comes to the temple and the tabernacle, and these magnificent edifices, visuals, optics becomes important. Okay, same goes for the Kohen Gadol, by the way. There's a nice song that we all like to join in. Emes Ma'aneda Mare Kohen Gadol. You know the joke about Murray Cohen, yeah? Mare Cohen. So we have this whole hymn, which if you look at the English, here's the English. It's very superficial. It's very beautiful. It's very superficial. It's all about the physical appearance of the Kohen Gadol, right? You know, people mock the United Synagogue and even the Sephardim that they wear robes, purple robes, and what's all this about? Rabbis don't wear robes and so on. But it does have a certain sense of majesty to it when the chief rabbi turns up in his robes. When you see someone, or you see a judge in their robes, it has a certain sense of majesty. Or the king in his robes, you know, it does have a certain sense of majesty that a suit just doesn't have the same effect. Or, you know, when you see, it's interesting, police officers you don't often see in dress uniform, you know, but like if you go to the, you know, the Remembrance Day things, you'll see all the police officers in their formal uniform as well. It's a lot more impressive than their day-to-day uniform. Right? The military also have dress uniform. Right? And certain religious groups also, you have a certain dress code of something you might wear. Or you might have, like the chief rabbi, I don't think the present one really wears, but the purple robes or whatever Rabbi Sachs used to wear, certainly. So, let's read this. Who'd like to read? Who's feeling poetic? Brenda.
Yes, like the image of a rainbow appearing in the midst of a cloud, like a rose in the heart of a lovely garden, like a lamp flickering between the window slat, like a room hung with sky blue and royal purple, like a garden lily penetrating the thorn weeds, like an appearance of Orion and what's that?
Ryan and Pleiades.
Seen in the south, how fortunate was the eye that beheld all this.
Right, goodness me, it's so materialistic. The Kohen Gadol was, he looked like this, he looked like that, and like, enough already. You know, he was the Kohen Gadol, he was a holy person. If he wasn't holy, he died in the Kodesh Kodashim. Surely that's more important than his appearance. So the answer is it's partly our fault. It seems, and the commentaries talk about this, that the Mishkan was a little bit of an antidote. Anyone know what it was an antidote to?
What, to sacrifices?
Nope. Hold that thought for a minute. Let's talk about something else for a minute. There's a mitzvah to appoint a king. The Torah says, when you will enter the land and you'll be like all the other nations, you'll want to appoint a king. Anyone know how long it took to appoint the first king?
Oh, several hundred years, wasn't
Several
it?
hundred years. It wasn't in Moshe or Yoshua's time. So one of the classic questions is, why didn't they appoint a king sooner? So there is an interpretation that says that God's not saying you should have a king. He's saying that if you want to have a king, because you want to be like everyone else, then I will concede that you can have a king, but they need to have this and that, and they can't have too many horses, and they have to have the Torah with them at all times and all these kind of things. So it could be that it's a concession to human need. So there is a suggestion that and you often find this, by the way, there's a famous phrase, Makdim refuah lamaka. Sometimes God gives us the cure before the disease. So chronologically, this all occurs before the golden calf. So what does the golden calf prove? The golden calf proves that people need visuals. They need optics, right? Moshe's gone up the mountain. They don't see him, out of sight, out of mind. They need a physical representation. So it's very un-Jewish, but they need it. So God says, okay, I see that you need a physical visual, like an impressive visual thing. You obviously can't have an image of an animal. We'll give you a Mishkan. We'll give you a place where it's an impressive place visually, but where my presence is felt. So there's a suggestion that it's a concession to human failings, basically. It's also, have I got this slide here? No. There's also an idea that, yeah, basically, sometimes when we see something very impressive, you see a palace or you see something very grand, also gives you a certain sense of majesty.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. So we can't just rely on miracles. We can't just rely on hearing even. We can't rely on the events in history. We have to have some kind of visual stimulus. And that's where the Mishkan comes in. It's a very visual stimulus. The Kohen Gadol in his impressive uniform is very visual. And that also brings honor to the temple, right? If you would go to a military ceremony and no one would be in uniform, you'd be very disappointed. Right? A uniform brings about a certain respect, which is what we said earlier, glory and respect. Let's see what Maimonides has to say about the power of visual stimuli. Here, who would like to read?
I'll read.
Sorry.
Okay.
The soul needs to rest and to do what relaxes the senses, such as looking at beautiful decorations and objects, so that weariness be removed from it.
Right. Now, Maimonides says something very politically incorrect, right? So here he's saying that there is value to seeing beautiful decorations, beautiful objects. Right? There's a shul. Did I mention this last week? The shul in Bal Harbour, Florida. I don't remember.
No, I don't think so.
There's a shul in a place called Bal Harbour, which is a suburb, I think, of Miami, Florida. And it's a very wealthy neighborhood. And there's a Chabad rabbi there. And when he went there, Rabbi Lipska is a very famous rabbi, Sholder Lipska. The rabbi told him the shul should be as luxurious as people's homes. So this is a
You
place
did
like,
mention it.
right. So this is a place like Bishop.
I remember now.
It's a place like Bishop's Avenue. You know, if you're living on the Bishop's Avenue, your shul shouldn't be a shack. That you wouldn't live in a place like that. Your shul should at least look like a place that you would feel at home. You know, if in your home, you know, so it depends where you are. So if you know, St. John's Wood, they have Tony Page caters the Kiddush every week. So on the one hand, maybe that's over the top. On the other hand, if you would have fancy catered food at home, why shouldn't you do it in shul? Why should shul be, you know, more lowly, right? That's not Judaism. So on the one hand, you shouldn't go overboard. On the other hand, you can have an appreciation. So Maimonides says, actually, it's good for our soul to look at beautiful decorations and objects, to appreciate art and nature and all different things. And architecture. It can actually be quite, you know, invigorating. Now you could say, but it's all physical, it's all visual, it's all superficial. Maybe, but it gives you a certain sense. Now here's the politically incorrect thing, which we could debate from here till kingdom come. So there is a halacha in the Torah that says a Kohen who has a physical blemish cannot serve in the temple, right? There's a lot of discussion about that. So Maimonides says that unfortunately, this is just human nature. That if somebody doesn't look the part, unfortunately, people will judge. They shouldn't, but they will. That's what Maimonides says. So there's nothing to do with the prayer or divine service. It's to do with human nature. Now, that's a really difficult one because we know that's true. On the other hand, it's very sad.
Yeah.
You know, it's very sad when you hear these stories about somebody who, you know, left their fiance because they were disfigured in a fire or something. You know, it's awful. It's horrible. You know, that people are so superficial. On the other hand, it happens. So he suggests that it's a human failing, but we do need beautiful physical stimuli. And that's part of the idea of the Mishkan. And that's part of the reason for celebrating art or architecture, or, you know, you want to go look at the 7 wonders of the world, do it, because it gives you an appreciation. It's a certain beauty. I mean, I think the only one I've been to is the Grand Canyon. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's an experience. You know, it's not the same as, you know, looking up the hill in Epping Forest, which is also very beautiful. So if we want God to dwell in the physical world, sometimes we have to have things that are visually stimulating for us and inspiring. And it's the same thing with the Mishkan, the temple, and the Kohen Gadol. The temple is this also great, all the silver and all the decoration, all the elaborate, gold and silver, and all, the elaborate carvings and all the rituals and the ceremonies. When we had the Queen's funeral, right, it went on for days, and there were all this. It's funny, people are saying, oh, no one knows what to do. There was somebody, I don't remember their name, whose whole job for the last 70 years has been basically, that they read up on all the protocols for these occasions, and they knew exactly what to do. And I remember somebody said on the rabbis group I'm on, what will happen now the Queen's died? We have no monarch. And I said, no, if you understand these things, the moment she died, Charles became king.
That's right.
There's no interruption. And that's written, in whatever protocols, everybody knows it. We hadn't dealt with it for 70 years. So watching the Queen's funeral, all these things that, people haven't seen probably in their lifetime, people saying, oh, no one does pomp and circumstance ceremony quite like the British. Nobody else does it as well. We're really good at that. And they're saying, Charles has said some things he won't have, some of the ceremonies he'll cut out or he'll scale back. And on the one hand, maybe that's good, especially when it comes to spending public money. On the other hand, some of these things are very traditional. And once you lose it, it's very hard to regain it. We know that from Judaism. If you stop doing something, it's very hard to start again. And it's easy to poo-poo things that may be a bit, archaic or outdated, but there's a certain beauty in tradition. I was at a wedding yesterday morning. I don't know if I posted on Facebook. It was on a group. I don't know if anyone saw it. I don't remember if it was public, but they had two chazanim, Adrian Alexander and Elliot Alderman. They both sing very nicely. It's a certain style. It's traditional chazanas. Not everyone likes it nowadays. I actually thought it was a very nice wedding service. It was very different from what most of the weddings I go to, but I appreciated it because I have an appreciation of the glory and the splendor of that kind of style of worship, right? And those shawls also have a certain glory to them. Again, it's easy to poo-poo it. They look like cathedrals or whatever. They do have a certain majesty that our shawl doesn't quite have. When you walk into a shawl that's basically looks like a cathedral. So there is a place for aesthetics. There is a place for the visual. And in fact, also, I think that's the last slide. Oh, we've got one more slide. How to say beauty in Hebrew? Anyone know?
Yafe?
Pam knows. She's not here. Hadar.
Yafa?
Hadar.
Yeah.
Adar.
Hadar. Hadar. Right? Haddar in English, or Hadar. Hadar is beauty. There's another word related you may have come across, hidor mitzvah. Hidor mitzvah means to embellish or beautify a mitzvah. So, for example, we try to make Kiddush in a nice silver cup. We don't use a paper cup if we can avoid it. At your Seder table, you put your, decanters and your, nice fancy silverware on the table, just to make the table look very elaborate and very grand even. Better not to use paper if you can avoid it, besides for the environment. When you buy an esrog, you don't buy the cheapest one you can find. You buy a very beautiful one that may cost a bit more money. When you go and buy tefillin for your son, you don't necessarily always buy just the cheapest, most basic thing. People want to spend a little bit more on a mitzvah. It's very beautiful that people do that. There's times you will probably do that without even realizing it. It might just be as simple as you buy a nice wine for Kiddush. You don't just buy the cheapest you can find. So there is a concept of, when it comes to physical mitzvah, what we call hidor mitzvah, which is very much a physical, visual thing. That's why we decorate the sukkah, by the way. It's called noi, it's called beauty, right? What do you mean? A sukkah is beautiful because it's a mitzvah. You don't need pictures to make it beautiful. But we do it. It's a human thing. There's many, many mitzvahs like that, actually. The whole business of decorating the shul. Do you really need trees in a shul to remind you that, but we're human beings, and it impresses us to see flowers around the shul. It's nice. It's pretty. That's fine. No one's saying that you have to have a plain chuppah with, it's nice to have 4 poles and a talus, but you can also have a chuppah with flowers and things. It's fine. You are beautifying something. You're making it more elegant and embellishing it. So we do find that the material and the visual is important to a point. I would say, as long as it's in moderation. It's the same as when we say Judaism isn't about living on a hilltop, being a hermit, being celibate, living on bread and water, take a vow of silence. Right? Judaism is about living, please God, having a family, living normally, and eating and drinking and sleeping and resting and enjoying yourself in different ways, and living life and talking to people and interacting socially and You don't have to only eat bread, you can eat more than that. And it's interesting, actually, if you look, there were individuals throughout history that there were various books written about some of the early Hasidim that there would be what was called a parush. Parush was someone who basically was would separate themselves from everyone else. Sort of person that would hardly sleep and would live on bread and water and would possibly not be married, I don't know exactly, and didn't socialize and basically was, a loner and very sort
A
of
hermit.
but more than that, it was a spiritual kind of wandering Jew that was very spiritual. It might be the guy in the back of the shul that never speaks to anyone but davens for hours, let's say. And it was generally
like Samson did.
You could be, yeah. So it was generally frowned upon, actually, as a way of serving God. It wasn't seen as the ideal for serving God, because you're supposed to serve God in this world. Like the Nazir, right? What was the Nazirite? Someone who says, I want to be a super holy, so I'm going to abstain from wine, because wine is pleasure and meat. These things are pleasure. I'm going to have otherworldly pleasures instead. And we find that the Nazir, at the end of his vow, had to actually bring a sin offering. So, right, classic question. What was the sin? The sin was that he denied himself pleasures in this world. So in Judaism doesn't shy away from the physical world and the material world and visuals. And we see that in extremists in terms of the tabernacle, the temple. It may be a concession to our humanity that we see from the golden calf, we need physical manifestations. But whatever it is, that's the reality. So coming back to the question, why do I have to wear these clothes for glory and splendor? The answer is because it's human nature, and that's how we respond, right? Everybody loves a man in uniform, something like that, yeah? Right? That's how we respond. We respond well to somebody that looks the part. It's inspiring. Right? A uniform may inspire confidence or trust or safety, feelings of safety, or feelings of, formality and majesty, depends what the uniform is. So it's the same thing here. The Kohen Gadol has a uniform. He doesn't just wear regular clothes. And the whole Mishkan is a very visual stimulus. And that's fine, as long as it's balanced. And we're ending with a quote from Rabbi Sachs about beauty. Here we go. I believe that beauty has power, and in Judaism it has always had a spiritual purpose, to make us aware of the universe as a work of art, to testify to the supreme artist, God himself. Right? In other words, it's through the beauty, whether it's natural beauty or great architecture or impressive clothing, that people actually come to appreciate the God himself. So the rider to that is it has to be done the right way and in moderation. Sorry, not in moderation so much as in balance, in equilibrium. So I once heard a story. After I heard this story, I got to know the protagonist. I'm not convinced it's true, but it's a nice story. There's a certain Jew who was quite wealthy and lived in a very nice house with very nice, my grandmother used to say not to use nice, with beautiful furniture and fittings and what have you. And everything a bit over the top, like this very fancy menorah, which was made of like crystal glass, probably worth thousands of dollars. I think it was in America. Anyway, so I have a friend who's now a singer, actually. Anyway, I knew him when he was in Yeshiva, and he's telling me the story that when they were in this particular town, they went to stay with this rabbi. He was a rabbi, I think. Or whatever. They went to stay with this gentleman, and one of them's he basically told them that you're going to be staying here. I think it was in the basement, and he had his menorah in the basement, which was this very elaborate crystal sort of glass, whatever. And one of the boys had a bag over his shoulder, and as he turned around to put the bag down, the bag swung and hit the menorah, and it smashed. And the boys were mortified, and the landlord, whatever, the host said, "Don't worry, it's only money." And the boy who told me the story said, that's the right attitude to have, isn't it? Could have got very angry, what have you done? He said, that's the right attitude to have. So I know on the protagonist now, I'm not convinced it's a totally true story, but it's a nice sentiment. So we're not saying to downplay the material or the physical, the visual. We're saying they play a very important part in life. That is reality. By the way, the Talmud says a person's not supposed to marry someone, a particular man, marry a woman that they've never seen, right? You might say, what do you mean never seen? Right? Some people get married after living together for 10 years now. Okay, but let's say in theory, right? You go back to Yitzchak or Rivka, anyone, right? You say to your daughter, I have a nice boy for you. Would you like to go on a blind date? And will you agree to marry him? And they speak on the phone a few times. And she says, I really feel like we're clicking, we're connecting. That's nice. You need to meet. You need to see if she's attractive to you and if you're attractive to her. The Talmud says you can't marry someone you haven't looked at. So in the very, 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 very from circles, I guess they meet for 5 minutes, and that's deemed to having looked at them, right? We would interpret it more as saying that you have to feel a connection. If you don't feel a connection, right, that might be superficial, but it's important. It's not the only thing, but it's important. So beauty and what's on the externality is important to a degree. Okay, any questions?
Well, this beauty
It's
is in the
like-
eye of the beholder. That's the thing.
Correct. That is definitely true. 1 second.